Today, my daughter came by to visit, but it didn't go well for either of us that I don't think she left feeling happy. She was polite, even affectionate, but too much time has gone by, and the wounds run too deep for me to simply accept her warmth without hesitation. If she's really as great as she seemed, then why haven't I spoken to her in 5 years? It all started with something her mother did that I can still hear the last words I spoke to Emily 5 years ago, back at her mother's funeral. After enduring one of the most gut-wrenching days of my life, I walked up to Emily by the gravesite, and, with every ounce of bitterness I could summon, I told her she meant as much to me as the woman we had just buried. Then I turned to my son, Jack, and delivered the same blow, jabbing my finger at him while the crowd stared, stunned. The wide-eyed shock on the faces of friends and family, those looks will haunt me until the day I die. That pain, that moment, is burned into my memory. The agony of a family torn apart. First, losing their mother, and then, they lost me too. I walked away from it all that day, with my youngest daughter, Laura, by my side. That it was supposed to be a day of celebration, our 25th wedding anniversary, a bright June day, filled with friends and family. The sun was shining, and everything seemed perfect. My father, in his wheelchair, sat at the head table with Natalie's parents, and our 3 children were scattered around, along with neighbors and friends. We were showered with gifts, more than we ever expected. Even the mayor came by with a special gift from the town council, a plaque marking June 14th as Natalie and Tom Morris Day. Under a huge white tent, over 200 people danced and laughed late into the night. When it came time for us to renew our vows, there wasn't a dry eye in sight. Natalie's and mine were no exception. I didn't notice much else at that moment. Not our kids standing beside us, not our families holding hands in the front row, not even Bo, our golden retriever, lying quietly near the preacher. All I could see was Natalie, the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. Our oldest daughter, Emily, had just returned from her honeymoon a week earlier, after getting married a month before our anniversary. Jack had finished his sophomore year of college, and Laura had just wrapped up her freshman year. It was good to have them all home again. I wouldn't say it out loud, but I missed the noise, the chaos of having everyone around. I think Natalie felt the same way. For a brief moment, we were a complete family again, but only a few days after the party, things started to unravel. I was returning the tables and chairs we had rented when I accidentally clipped a brand new Lexus in the parking lot. I took the corner too tight and smashed up the headlight. The cop who showed up to handle the report was Adam, a kid who had grown up with Jack and played on a lot of his sports teams. He'd gotten taller than me over the years, and standing there in his uniform, he looked like a man fully in charge. That I had watched Adam grow up, and honestly, I felt as proud of him as I did of my own kids. After we sorted out all the paperwork, we just stuck around, chatting about this and that. At the end of the conversation, though, something he said really got me thinking. "Well, Mr. Morris," Adam said, reaching out to shake my hand, "I've got to head back to the station. It was great seeing you again, and I'm sorry I missed your anniversary party." My folks said it was a blast. I shook his hand, remembering the boy who used to try and steal second base in Little League, only to get thrown out every time. But here he was now, a grown man, someone I was proud to call a friend. "Oh, and tell Mrs. Morris to keep an eye on those stop signs," he added with a sly grin. I might not be so lenient next time. That comment threw me for a loop. I must have looked confused because Adam suddenly seemed awkward, like he'd said something he shouldn't have. "Oops, I didn't mean to say that," he mumbled, looking embarrassed. Sensing the tension, I tried to play it off and figure out what the hell he was talking about. "No worries, Adam. Natalie doesn't always tell me when she gets a ticket. She thinks I'll get mad and take her car keys away," I chuckled. I wouldn't, but I let her believe that. It gives me a little leverage at dinner. "What did you give her a ticket for?" "Maybe I'll poke some fun at her about it." Adam looked even more uncomfortable, his voice a bit uneasy. "I, really shouldn't have mentioned it. I don't want to get anyone in trouble." "It was nothing," I smiled wider. trying to reassure him. No one's in trouble, Adam. Just some harmless teasing between husband and wife. What happened? Well, he hesitated. It was a couple of weeks ago, on Saturday the 31st, I think. Your wife pulled out of the Holiday Inn parking lot onto Route 40 without stopping at the stop sign. She didn't hit anyone or cause any problems, but she took off fast enough that I had to pull her over and remind her to slow down. Technically, I could have written her up for not stopping, but since there wasn't any harm done, I just gave her a warning. It wasn't a big deal. Yeah, Adam, sounds like you did the right thing, I said, trying to brush it off. I'll remind her to be more careful, and maybe I'll give her a hard time about it. Thanks for letting me know. After unloading the chairs and tables, I sat in my truck, mulling over my conversation with Adam. 2 weeks ago, on the 31st. I'd been at my dad's place for the weekend, helping out with the chores he couldn't manage anymore. It was also 2 weeks after Emily's wedding. That Saturday, I spent the day with my dad, taking him to check out a retirement facility, trying to get him to consider moving somewhere easier to manage. He wasn't having it, of course, but I had to at least try. I spent the whole day with him and didn't get home until Sunday night around 9. Nothing seemed off, and Natalie didn't mention anything about a run-in with Adam. She just said she'd had a quiet day, catching up on her reading. I chalked it up to Adam maybe remembering wrong. After all, Natalie wouldn't lie to me about something like that, right? So, I pushed it to the back of my mind as just one of those odd, unexplained things. Then, about a month after our big anniversary party, I got a call from my sister. She'd found Dad on the kitchen floor during one of her visits. He'd taken a fall that morning and couldn't get back into his wheelchair by himself. She said he wasn't hurt, just embarrassed, but I knew it was time to step in. I made plans to head over that Saturday and try again to convince him to move somewhere smaller, where he could get the help he needed. Maybe this scare would finally be enough to make him listen, but my dad is as stubborn as they come. With Jack and Laura home for the summer, I decided to drag them along with me, though, really, I guilt-tripped them into it. You guys haven't seen Grandpa in a long time, and he's not gonna be around forever, I reminded them. They gave in, of course. Natalie said she was looking forward to a quiet day at home and planned to finish reading her book. During the hour-long drive, Jack started telling me about some girl he had a crush on from his Philosophy 101 class. Laura, on the other hand, said she wasn't interested in dating right now. Plenty of time for that after school. She shrugged. We had a nice chat about their thoughts on relationships, which naturally led to me retelling, for what had to be the 100th time, the story of how their mom and I met and fell in love. They've heard it all before, but I still like to share it, maybe hoping they'll see a bit of how things were when their mom and I were happy. When we arrived, Dad seemed more lively than I'd seen him in a while. He perked up when the kids hugged him and settled in to hear his well-worn stories. We had brunch, talked, and soaked in the time together. Around noon, Dad dozed off in his chair, and we all decided to give him some peace and quiet. Hey, you two hang out here with Grandpa. I'll be back in a bit. I want to grab some tools and take down that old dead tree in the backyard before it crashes into the house, I said. Jack and Laura made themselves comfortable in the living room, watching TV and keeping an eye on Grandpa while I headed out. For some reason, instead of driving straight home to get the chainsaw and ropes, I took the interstate exit that led onto Route 40. At the bottom of the hill, I saw the entrance to the Holiday Inn and, without really thinking, turned into the parking lot. As I pulled in, I glanced around and noticed the stop sign at the bottom of the hill, the one Natalie apparently missed. To be honest, I could see how someone might not notice it right away. It was easy to overlook, but just as I was about to leave, something grabbed my attention. A car parked in the lot that shouldn't have been there. Natalie's car. I stopped and did a double take. Sure, there are plenty of silver Toyota Camrys around, but only one with her distinctive license plate, Conum. That I got out, walked over, and peered inside. Everything seemed normal. The doors were locked, nothing out of place, but something didn't sit right with me. Why would she be at the Holiday Inn? She told me she wanted to stay home and finish her book. None of this made any sense that I figured I should at least let her know her car was here. Maybe she wasn't aware. I called home first but got the answering machine. Then I tried her cell phone. She picked up right away, her voice sounding bright and chipper. "Hey, honey. What's up?" she asked. I don't know what came over me, but for the first time in our marriage, I lied. "Oh, nothing much," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just running a few errands for Dad, thought I'd check in." "I tried the house phone, but you didn't answer, so I figured I'd call your cell." "Where are you?" "I'm at the mall," she replied casually. "I finished my book and thought I'd do a little shopping." "You don't mind, do you?" My stomach turned. She was lying to me, at least, that's what it felt like. I swallowed hard and forced a laugh. "No, just don't spend the kids' college fund," I joked. "What time are you coming home?" "Probably around 6, she said. "Do you want me to make dinner?" "No, I'm not feeling too great," I replied. "I might stay at Dad's tonight and send the kids home." "I'll let you know." "Okay, just call me when you decide," she said, her tone soft, almost sad. Before hanging up, I threw in one last question, hoping, praying, she'd be honest. "Oh, by the way, did you drive to the mall alone?" "Yeah, I drove myself," she said, her voice steady. She replied, "I just got here a few minutes ago." "Why?" "Just wondering," I said, trying to sound casual. "Well, I gotta go." "Have a good time, and watch out for Adam when you leave the Holiday Inn," I added, my voice laced with bitterness as I hung up the phone. That I wasn't sure what to expect. Should I confront her? Demand answers? I just stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling utterly lost. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a muffled scream coming from the hotel. I scanned the area, but nothing seemed out of place. No sign of what caused the scream, no rushing crowds, just silence. I leaned against the hood of Natalie's Camry, keeping a close watch. Moments later, a police car pulled up, and Adam stepped out. "Hey, Mr. Morris. Did you call 911? He asked. "No, Adam. I didn't," I replied, my voice strained. "Well, someone called about a car break-in." "I'd better check with the manager inside," he said, already heading toward the entrance. "Adam, wait," I called after him. "Can you do me a favor?" "Sure, anything," he replied, turning back. "When you go inside, can you check if Mrs. Morris is there and see who she's with?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but the knot in my stomach told me what I didn't want to hear. Adam hesitated, his face turning pale. Sure, Mr. Morris," he stammered, looking visibly flustered. "I'll check on things and come back to you." I'm really sorry." With that, he hurried back to his cruiser and drove up to the motel entrance, leaving me in limbo. I stood there, heart pounding, my mind racing with all the worst possibilities. What was going on in there? I wanted to march into that hotel, demand to know the truth, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, in the distance, I heard the wail of a siren. It grew louder and louder until it stopped in front of the hotel. Paramedics rushed in, and moments later, they emerged, loading someone onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. My stomach dropped. Adam returned, driving slowly toward me, his face grim. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Morris," he said, stepping out of the car. "There was an incident inside. Your wife, she was taken to county hospital by ambulance." I couldn't even process his words. What happened?" I finally managed to ask. Adam sighed heavily. She tried to run through a sliding glass door. Luckily, it didn't shatter, but she's badly bruised and has a cut over her eye. She's shaken up, really upset. The man who was with her, he left when the ambulance arrived. I've got his information in a statement, but I can't share it with you right now. You can file a Freedom of Information Act request tomorrow to get it." I stood there, numb. My wife had been at the Holiday Inn with another man, and now she was on her way to the hospital because of it. Adam extended his hand, offering comfort, but I couldn't even respond. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. He gave me one last sorrowful look before getting back in his cruiser and driving away. It wasn't until I saw his taillights disappear that I somehow managed to get back into my truck and drive to my dad's house. I pulled into the driveway, my mind spinning, my chest tight. As soon as I parked, Laura rushed out to meet me, her face full of concern. "Dad, what's wrong?" "What happened?" she asked, panic rising in her voice that I couldn't speak. I stood there, struggling to keep it together, but it was too much. Before I knew it, the dam broke, and I burst into tears right there in front of her. I had never cried in front of my kids before, and seeing their dad in such a state made Laura start sobbing too. Jack came out a moment later, and through my tears, I somehow managed to tell them, "Your mom's in the hospital. You need to go see her." They were shocked, but I didn't explain what happened. I just handed the keys to Jack and told them to go without me. "I'll stay here tonight," I said, my voice shaky. They looked at me, confused and worried, but they didn't push me. They just nodded, got in the car, and drove off. Once they were gone, I checked on Dad. He was fine, but I wasn't. I collapsed onto the couch, my heart racing, staring blankly at the floor as tears streamed down my face. Dad wheeled over to me and sat beside me. "What's on your mind, Tom? What's bothering you?" I looked at him, wanting so badly to open up, but I couldn't. My dad's always been old-fashioned, keeping his emotions bottled up, and I guess I inherited that from him. Sharing personal things just wasn't something we did. Whenever I faced tough times growing up, Dad's usual response was, "Act like a man, and things will work out." I half expected the same this time, so I kept quiet. But, to my surprise, he didn't say that. Instead, he looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Let me tell you a story about your mother and me, something I've never told you, your sister, or anyone else. Just after you were born, I got into some trouble at work. Your mother wanted this expensive red dress, and I couldn't afford it. So I stole a tool from the job and sold it to get the money. Well, I got caught. I paid it back eventually, but they still fired me and turned me over to the police. I ended up on probation for a year. That was the easy part, though. The hard part was facing your mother. She was furious, more disappointed in me than she had ever been. It hurt our marriage deeply. She was distant, cold, and it felt like I had lost her. Then one day, she came home and said she might have found me a job at a place nearby where she worked. She suggested I go there the next morning for an interview. That night, she hugged me, looked me in the eye, and said she forgave me. Son, she forgave me for almost ruining our marriage. She put her pride aside and let me back into her heart. From that day until the day she passed, I never did a single thing that didn't make her proud. Her love made me a better man. Yes, she was hurt for a long time, but she was a better person than me, and together we moved past it. Tom, I don't know what you're going through right now, but it sounds like something similar. Maybe you need forgiveness, or maybe you need to forgive someone like your mother did. But maybe whatever happened can't be forgiven. Whatever it is, I believe you'll make the right choices. I just pray it all works out. And, son, I might not say it enough, but I'm very proud of the man you've become, and I love you very much." His words hit me harder than I expected. But I was too drained to respond, just nodding as he wheeled himself back to his room. The phone rang during the night, but I didn't answer. My cell phone buzzed shortly after, but I ignored it too. I wasn't ready to deal with whatever was coming. Sleep didn't come, and I spent the weekend with Dad, talking to Emily and Jack on the phone. But not to Natalie. I couldn't. When the kids asked if I had spoken to her, I just told them I wasn't ready. Not in the state I was in. On Monday morning, I called work and told them I needed a few days off for a family emergency. I didn't know the full details of what had happened with Natalie. Honestly, I think my kids knew more than I did. But one thing was for certain, I couldn't handle knowing any more than I already did. That afternoon, the familiar sound of her voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "Hi, Tom," she said softly, without turning around. I muttered, "Hi, Natalie." I stayed still, staring ahead, unable to meet her eyes. She pulled up a chair in front of me, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Tom," she said, her hands resting in her lap. I glanced down at them. Those hands had always been strong, capable, but now one was bruised, and the other was bandaged up. When I finally looked at her, I could barely recognize the woman sitting before me. Her nose was held together by a web of bandages, the bones underneath clearly broken. A big gauze patch covered one eye, and the other was swollen, surrounded by an ugly mix of black and orange bruises. She looked like a wreck, the kind of sight Laura would have described as a train wreck. This was the same woman who had once been so beautiful, so full of life. But now? Now she was damaged, physically and, in my mind, emotionally too. I couldn't tell if my view of her was clouded by my own hurt or if she truly looked that bad. "Tom," she began again, her voice small and full of regret. "I came here to apologize, I know. I know sorry isn't enough," Natalie began, her voice shaky, "but it's all I have, Tom. Emily drove me here because I'm too upset to drive myself. I needed to see you, to talk to you, to make you understand. I know what I did was horrible. What I did to you, to us, it's all my fault. You didn't do anything wrong, you didn't deserve this. As much as I've hurt you, I feel that pain too. Maybe even more, because I caused it." Her words felt like they were sliding off me. I didn't want to hear them. All I could feel was anger simmering beneath my skin. Natalie continued, oblivious to my silence. "The pain I'm feeling, Tom, it's self-inflicted. And it may have destroyed something that means more to me than life itself, our marriage. Please, I just want to explain what happened. Maybe if you understand." "No," I cut her off, my voice cold and final. "I don't want to hear any more. Knowing what I know is already tearing me apart. If I hear one more word about it, it might destroy me completely. Tom, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "If you could just listen, maybe you'd understand why I was weak, why I did what I did. There's a chance, Tom. A chance we can heal if you know." "Damn it," I said. "No," I exploded, standing up from my chair, the anger too much to contain. "I don't care what your reasons are. I can't handle this. I can't listen to excuses about why you threw away our 25 years together." "But Tom," she pleaded, "if you don't hear me out, how can we move past this? How can we be a family again?" I didn't even look at her, just turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing, her hands hiding her bruised and battered face. I made my way toward the kitchen, hoping to escape, but Emily followed, her voice catching up with me. "Dad, please, please listen to her," she begged. "Mom needs you to understand, to forgive her. She wants to explain what happened. We can't move forward unless you hear her out." I turned to face her, letting the frustration and rage take over. "Emily," I said, my voice steely, "if you think listening to her story is going to magically fix everything, you're more naive than she is. If she needs to clear her conscience, she can write it all down and send it to me in a letter. I can't sit here and listen to her trying to justify why she destroyed our marriage and shattered me in the process. I can't be around her right now. I just can't." Without another word, I grabbed my car keys and walked out, leaving them both standing there. I didn't know where I was going, and frankly, I didn't care. I just had to get away. I didn't shed many tears on the drive. I'd already done plenty of that on Dad's patio. I wasn't sure if I'd return home or just keep driving. The next day, when I pulled into Dad's driveway, Laura was the first to greet me at the door. She smiled and hugged me tight, and somehow, in that moment, that simple smile brought a flicker of warmth back into my heart. It reminded me that, even in the depths of misery, happiness could still exist. Maybe someday I could feel that again, but what it didn't clarify was whether the path I was on would bring smiles to others, or just more heartache. At dinner that night, I sat with Dad and Laura, and for the first time since the disaster with Natalie, I laid out my plans. Dad, I've decided I'm going to move in here with you for a while. I need distance from all of this, from her. Plus, you could use some help around the house, and we both know you need someone to cook more than bacon and eggs. Dad chuckled softly at that, the kind of laugh that only comes when you've shared a lifetime of quiet understanding with someone. You're right about that, son, he said. I could use a hand. And I'm glad to have you here. Turning to Laura, I said, could you help me gather some things from home? I can't go back there while Mom's still around, but I need to get some work stuff and a few things to settle in here. Laura nodded, her smile still warm. Of course, Dad. I'll help you get what you need, and just like that, I had made the decision. I was going to start over, at least for a little while, and distance myself from the wreckage of my marriage. Whether it was temporary or permanent, that was still to be seen. You can let everyone know that I'll be staying here until I figure out a more permanent solution, I told Laura. Just say Mom and I have separated for now. Keep it brief, no details. Sure, Dad. I'll head back tonight and grab what you need. Just give me a list. Should I say anything to Mom? Just tell her I'm living here and not to call me. When I'm ready, I'll reach out, I replied, handing her the list. That evening, Dad and I sat down to talk about my new living arrangements. I could tell he was relieved to have me around, but the weight of everything hung in the air between us. He didn't bring up Natalie or ask about what had happened. Instead, we did something we hadn't done in years. We played checkers. He won, like always, and I didn't mind. When Laura returned with my belongings, I was surprised to see her car packed to the brim. I brought my stuff too, she said, her tone firm and unyielding. I'll take the guest bedroom and stay here until school starts again. There was no questioning her decision. The look on her face made that clear. Together, we unloaded our things, and later that night, I couldn't help but ask her what had happened. Laura looked visibly upset. Can you believe what my sister said? She actually thinks you're the one acting childish, and that you should just go back home and make up with Mom. And Jack? He was just as bad. He basically told me that everyone cheats at some point, and it's not a big deal. He even had the nerve to suggest that you forgive Mom and find yourself a girlfriend on the side. She shook her head in disbelief. Can you believe those two jerks? I sighed. Laura. I don't want to hear it. I haven't done anything wrong, but somehow, everyone's treating me like the villain here. Sitting in Grandpa's house, they act like I'm the one who's messed up. Exactly, Laura was fuming now. Mom's the one who destroyed everything. She doesn't deserve forgiveness, not after what she did. That's why I'm here. They think you're wrong for not crawling back and apologizing. I couldn't stand hearing that, so I packed up my stuff when I grabbed yours. Laura's anger was intense, and I knew when she had made up her mind, there was no arguing. I let her vent, quietly listening as she ranted. For the next 2 months, I tried to settle into a routine. I went to work, helped around the house, and even taught Laura how to make a killer vegetable lasagna. Every few days, I'd get calls from Emily or Jack, asking when I was coming home. I could picture Natalie in the background, silently waiting to hear my response. Each time, I told them the same thing. I was staying with Dad, and I didn't want to hear anything about Natalie. Occasionally, they'd try to sneak in a comment about her, but I just hung up before they could finish. Then one day, Jack showed up at Dad's place. He looked serious, like he had something important to say. We went out back and sat on the patio. Dad, he started, his voice heavy, you need to come back home. It's been 2 months, and Mom, she's worse than ever. I'm heading back to school soon, and I can't leave Emily to take care of her alone. We're both worried about what she might do when we're not around. He paused for a moment, his eyes pleading with me. Mom cries all the time, Dad. She barely sleeps, and she's not eating. She's lost a lot of weight. Some of your friends have even come by, and they're just as worried as we are. She's not doing anything but sitting at home, feeling sorry for herself. We've tried to get her out of the house, to go eat, shop, anything, but she just starts crying all over again. He took a deep breath before delivering the line that cut through me. Dad, I think you've punished her enough. It's time to get over your grudge and come home. She's sorry. You're hurt, and so is she. But it's time to move on. I sat there, staring at Jack. This was the same kid I'd coached through baseball and soccer, the one I'd helped earn his Eagle Scout badge. Now, here he was, trying to convince me to go back to the woman who had shattered my world, but he's different now. Jack's no longer the son who once made me proud with his accomplishments and sound choices. Somewhere along the way, his values shifted. He actually thinks what his mother did is acceptable. If he believes that, then it sets a dangerous precedent for him too. I raised my kids to understand that promises matter. They're not just words but commitments to be honored. I tried to instill good morals in them through both my words and my actions. Now, here I was, thinking Jack had gone completely off the rails. Jack, you're a grown man now, so I'm going to speak plainly. Man to man. Get out of my house. How dare you come here and accuse me of being immature? I'm not the one who tore our family apart. If you think what your mother did is okay, then you've changed, and not for the better. Go home, take care of your mother, and leave me alone. I'll stay here as long as I need to. Now get out, before I throw you out. I stood up and walked inside, leaving him there to stew. A few minutes later, I heard his car pulling away. After that, Laura went back to school in late August. Emily and Jack didn't bother calling, and I figured Jack had gone back to school too, while Emily was likely preoccupied juggling her new husband and Natalie. It was just Dad and me now. That I end mid-September, I received a letter from Natalie. I had told Emily that if Natalie wanted to clear her conscience, she could write everything down and send it. Now, staring at the letter, I couldn't bring myself to read it. The wounds were still too raw. Instead, I set it aside and tried to focus on keeping my life moving forward. Laura called every few days to check on me and Dad. She mentioned that she had spoken with both Emily and Jack and that they were looking after their mother. Laura said she'd come visit for my birthday at the end of October, hoping by then I would have made a decision about our future. Being stuck in limbo wasn't doing anyone any good. I reassured her that we'd discuss things once I had some clarity. October 30th rolled around, and I hit the big 5-0, a milestone birthday. Laura arrived early that morning and excitedly announced that she was taking Dad and me out for a big Italian dinner to celebrate. You'll finally get to taste some real lasagna, she teased, taking a playful jab at my cooking skills. I'm pretty sure that was the first genuine smile I'd had in months. That we came back from dinner late, and after helping Dad get settled into bed, I joined Laura in the living room. I handed her a beer, and we sat down to talk. So, Dad, have you figured out what you're going to do? Laura asked, always preferring to get straight to the point. That I let out a long, heavy sigh. I've been doing a lot of thinking. The truth is, I don't have all the answers. I don't even fully understand why she did what she did. But avoiding her and refusing to talk isn't going to fix anything. I finally read her letter, but I'm not sure I believe everything she wrote. Maybe some of it's true, but a lot of it feels unbelievable. And since her affair went on for so long, I don't know if there's any chance we can fix things. Laura nodded quietly as I continued. Still, I know I need to sit down with her, hear her out, and tell her how I feel. If I can't trust her, then divorce might be the only option. But I've realized that I've been just as miserable without her as she's apparently been without me. I think I'm ready to move forward, whatever that looks like. Tomorrow, I'll call her, I started to say, but my speech was interrupted by Faye's cell phone ringing. Not yet finished, I let her take the call. It's Emily, she said, glancing at the display. I'll go outside to take it. She stepped out and returned minutes later, her face ashen and her eyes wide with shock. She looked around the room, then collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her tightly, waiting for her tears to subside. After a few moments, she pulled back, wiped her eyes, and looked at me with a pained expression. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "Mom passed away. Emily found her in the bathtub. It looks like she took all her sleeping pills." The gravity of what she said hit me hard. Emily hadn't shared many details, but the biggest unresolved issue was my role in Natalie's death. I didn't force the pills on her, but my refusal to communicate had worsened her emotional state. I was hurting and wanted her to feel the pain I felt. I loved her deeply, and her betrayal had crushed me. I never wanted her dead, I only wanted her to understand my anguish. Perhaps she did and couldn't bear it. Now, I'll never know for sure. All I know is that her infidelity had shattered our marriage, and my actions may have pushed her over the edge. We both made mistakes, may God forgive us both. Tomorrow was Natalie's funeral, my final farewell to her. I had to stay composed, face our friends and family, and say goodbye without breaking down. As I turned, the front door slammed, and Emily walked toward me from the back door. "Emily, are you okay?" I whispered as I took a seat across from her in a lawn chair. "No, not really," she replied. We sat silently, gathering our thoughts while the night breeze rustled the leaves around us. After a moment, Emily glanced at me and said, "You know, none of this would have happened if you'd just come home and forgiven her. She made a mistake. I'm sure you've made mistakes she forgave you for. She couldn't go on without you. Your pride ended her." I was stunned. My own daughter was blaming me for her mother's death. No matter how many times I said or thought it, I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't the one having an affair. I didn't deceive our friends and family for 6 months. I didn't swallow sleeping pills to ease my guilt. "Dad, tomorrow's going to be tough," Emily said, her tone softening. "Everyone's coming back here after the funeral, and there'll be a lot of people. You don't have to do anything, and you don't even have to be here if you don't want to. Jack and Mom's friends are handling everything, so you don't need to worry." Emily didn't even want me at the post-funeral gathering. What was happening? Maybe I was too emotional and stressed to understand her. One thing was certain, I didn't want to argue with my daughter on the eve of her mother's funeral. I stood up, went into the house, and down to the family room where I'd been sleeping. I gathered all my bedding and put it in the laundry hamper, then got dressed in my suit and tie. Downstairs, the kids were already dressed and waiting in the living room. Dad looked worn out. Laura came over and fixed my tie, just as her mother used to do countless times before. I kissed her on the forehead, took her hand, and we went out to the waiting limousine. Laura held onto my hand the whole way. She remained silent, her head bowed, not uttering a word to anyone, not even to me. As we arrived at the funeral home, a crowd of acquaintances and friends lingered in the foyer. The moment we walked in, the crowd seemed to part, almost as if parting from me. Their eyes, however, were not filled with the expected compassion. Instead, I saw glances of disdain and even contempt. When I attempted to acknowledge a few familiar faces, they quickly turned their backs, engrossed in their conversations. Wide boss approached, offering his condolences with a firm handshake, but the people around him wore the same disapproving expressions. He was the only one who spoke to me directly. The kids, on the other hand, received looks of sympathy from those I had already passed. The entire scene was bewildering. My experience with funerals was limited. The only one I had been deeply involved with was my mother's, and this felt entirely different. Laura walked beside me as we approached the casket. We knelt together to pay our final respects, the soft strains of organ music playing in the background. Yet, I could still hear whispers cutting through the solemnity. Fragments of their murmurs reached me. "Unforgiving jerk who abandoned her. He's to blame for this. Hypocrite, you drove her to this." Laura's grip on my hand tightened, our shared pain palpable. The service proceeded with a hymn that Natalie had cherished, a poignant departure from the usual funeral fare. Natalie's friends avoided eye contact with me and Laura, their demeanor cold. Emily and Stuart spoke, but Emily's closing words were particularly striking. She invoked forgiveness and mercy, drawing a parallel to Jesus' compassion for those who wronged him. It felt both cold and clinical. At the graveside, we each placed a red rose on Natalie's coffin. Laura went first, followed by me, then Emily and Stuart. Even Dad's friend, who had been wheeled past the coffin, seemed to offer his token gesture of farewell. Overcome by emotion, I confronted Emily and Stuart, my voice laced with bitterness. I told them they were dead to me because of their role in spreading falsehoods and painting me in a negative light. I made this declaration loudly, in front of everyone, before leaving with Laura, instructing the limo driver to depart swiftly and leave Emily and Stuart behind. Only a handful of people, including my boss, his wife, and a couple of neighbors, attended the post-funeral gathering. Emily and Jack found solace in each other's company at her place. Laura later revealed that many now blamed me for Natalie's death, believing I was responsible for her despair. This perception left me feeling even more isolated. Laura's visits during school breaks were the only bright spots in my lonely existence. Emily was absorbed with her in-laws, and Jack was either at school or elsewhere. To cope with my grief, I immersed myself in work, often waking in the middle of the night, tormented by memories of Natalie and her affair with David Smith, a former neighbor who had even attended our 25th anniversary celebration. Over time, the acute pain softened, but it lingered. Emily named her children after Natalie and Chance, but I've yet to meet them. Jack married a college girlfriend, only to divorce later, following his mother's example by committing infidelity. Since the funeral, I've lost touch with Jack. He moved to California, and there's been no communication between us. Laura, however, keeps me informed about their lives, reminding me that despite everything, they remain my children. At work, my boss became my main pillar of support. He respected my need for space but also encouraged me to push my limits, which eventually led to a promotion to senior manager. This change prompted a move to Orlando, Florida. In Orlando, I sold my old house and started fresh. To help my dog Bo adjust, I got him a companion, and now, life in our new home is settling into a routine. Most of my old friends from Maryland have drifted away, leaving only a few who still occasionally check in. After Dad's passing a year after Natalie's death, it was just me and Laura. She graduated at the top of her class and secured a good job in Florida, and for now, she's staying with me. I'm not ready for her to leave. She's been a steady source of support through these tough years. To avoid the loneliness of a solitary existence with just my dogs for company, I returned to an old passion, writing. Previously, I'd only written business reports, but recently I rekindled my interest in crafting short stories, even selling a few. What started as a simple story idea evolved into a manuscript reflecting a challenging chapter of my life. Though revisiting those painful memories was difficult, writing about them proved therapeutic. I completed a draft of the manuscript but kept it private, stored away in my den. To improve my writing, I enrolled in a creative writing class at the local community college. Most of my classmates were much younger, but I connected with two other older students, Nathan, who was working on a piece about his family's Civil War history, and Clara, a widow and mother of 5 who had moved to Florida for a new beginning and was exploring new interests through college courses. As Clara and I talked more, I realized we had a lot in common. I've always believed in letting my date talk and listening carefully, since there's usually a quiz later. Not having dated in nearly 3 decades, I was attentive to every detail Clara shared. One day, I noticed she had been doing most of the talking. When she asked about my background and why I was taking a writing course in Central Florida, I gave her a brief version of my story, hoping to redirect the conversation back to her. But she was persistent, probing and questioning until I finally invited her to dinner at my place the following Saturday. I told her if she wanted to learn more about me, she'd have to come over. Her smile and response was the warmest and most genuine I had seen in years. She accepted the invitation with a heartfelt, "Yes, I'd love to." Dinner with Clara was wonderful. As we stepped out onto the patio to enjoy the evening breeze under my palm trees, I remarked, "Not many men can make vegetable lasagna, let alone as well as that." "What other surprises do you have?" Clara replied with a teasing smile, I think I know most everything about you," I chuckled and said. "Well, I manage a distribution center for Folks Industries on the East Side. My daughter Laura lives with me. My wife passed away just over 5 years ago, and I have 2 other kids. You've met my golden retriever, Bo, and our new companion, Luke. That's pretty much me in a nutshell. Kind of boring, really, nothing too exciting." Clara's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Well, you did promise to tell me your story if I came to dinner. Spill the beans." "I'm waiting for all the juicy details." Instead of answering right away, I got up and went inside, a smile on my face as I prepared to share more of my story with Clara. When I returned, I was carrying a box, my novel, a collection of the most significant events in my life. I had been working on it for years, alongside a few short stories that I'd managed to sell to a local literary magazine. My computer is cluttered with stories, some drawn from my life, others purely imaginative. Before joining the creative writing class, I had penned something deeply personal, a narrative of my family and me. It's all contained in this box. Writing it helped me grapple with the pain of losing my wife and watching my family fall apart. I've never shared this with anyone, but I'd value your opinion. I think it might be only good for propping open doors on windy nights, but your perspective means a lot to me. Clara's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "I'd love to read your book." "What's it called?" I replied. "I call it Fair Weather Friends." She took the box from my hands, noting its weight. "Wow, it's hefty, 987 pages in total. I want you to be honest with me, even if your feedback is harsh. I need another viewpoint. I can't show it to my daughter. It would just bring back too many painful memories for her." "I don't want to hurt her." Clara smiled warmly. "I'd be honored to read it and give you my opinion. One thing you should know about me, I'm very opinionated. I tell it like it is, so be prepared for that." I'll start reading it tomorrow. We spent the rest of the evening discussing our writing class, life in Florida for people our age, and our favorite movies. It was a pleasant night, and for once, the Florida weather was kind. As I walked her to her car, she gave me a soft kiss on the cheek. I felt like a teenager again. After our small dinner party, Clara didn't show up for our next class, and I hadn't heard from her since. I began to worry that asking her to review my book might have made me seem intrusive or odd. I thought about calling her but hesitated, not wanting to appear pushy. 2 weeks later, I received a voicemail from Clara while I was out. Her message was upbeat and inviting. "Hello, Tom. This is Clara. I'd like you to come over to my place for dinner this Friday night. My son is visiting and staying with me for a few days, and I'd like you two to meet. I might have a surprise for you, so bring a bottle or 2 of that delicious white wine we enjoyed the other day. Be here at 7 o'clock, and call me back to let me know if you can make it." Bye. On Friday night, I dressed casually but neatly and brought 2 bottles of Balzar Riesling Cabinet Hattenheim Schützenhaus 2012. I had read in a local Orlando magazine that it was one of the best white wines of the year. Since my knowledge of wine was limited, I decided to trust the recommendation. I hoped it would pair well with whatever Clara was preparing. When I arrived, Clara greeted me warmly. "Hi Tom, come on in." She showed me around her home, and as we reached the patio, I saw a small table set for 3, adorned with candles and wine glasses. A man stepped into the light from between 2 orange trees. "Tom, I'd like you to meet my son, Oliver." "Oliver, this is Tom Morris. It's a pleasure to meet you," Oliver said, extending his hand as we shook hands. "Mom's spoken highly of you. She's impressed, and that's not easy to do." "Nice to meet you too, Oliver. But whatever she's told you might just be some of the fiction we spin in our creative writing class." "There's not much exciting about me," I replied with a chuckle. Clara smiled and gestured towards the table. She took the wine bottles and placed them in a chiller. As we settled in, she joined us with that radiant smile of hers and took my hand. "Tom," she began, "I invited you here under somewhat misleading pretenses. We'll eat once the wine chills, but first, I have something I think will surprise you, hopefully in a good way." I was intrigued but also a bit apprehensive. Clara continued, "My son is here tonight because of something I did that I might not have asked you about beforehand. I went ahead and did it, and now it's too late to change things. If you're upset, well, you have every right to be. Here's what happened. I read your book in just 2 days, and it absolutely blew me away. Once I got halfway through, I couldn't put it down. It's the most inspiring and heart-wrenching story I've ever read. I cried at the chapter where you moved in with your dad after your wife's revelation, and again at the part about your children. It's the most amazing book I've ever read, and I had to share it with my son. I sent it to him, and he read it. Normally, he doesn't read books from unknown authors without being asked, but he did it for me. He loved it too and wants to help you edit it so we can publish it. Isn't that fantastic?" I sat there, stunned, my mind racing. I probably looked foolish, but I couldn't help it. Clara's smile was infectious, and when I glanced at Oliver, he returned my gaze with a warm smile. "Mom was right, Mr. Morris," Oliver said, picking up where his mother had left off. "This is the best debut novel I've ever read, and I've seen a lot. I work at Prentice Press in New York, handling new author submissions. Each month, we get about 100 books. I review them and then pass them on to 2 other reviewers. If we all agree that it's good, we help edit it and get it ready for publication. We want to publish your book. We'll discuss the details later, but for now, congratulations. It's a standout book, and it will be successful." I was overwhelmed, my words failing me. Clara just smiled, gave me a gentle kiss on the forehead, and went to prepare dinner. During the meal, we discussed my book extensively, at times growing emotional. We enjoyed mahi-mahi and peach cobbler as Oliver explained the publishing process, promotion, and royalties. I realized I probably wouldn't get rich from it, but the validation was priceless. After dinner, as Oliver headed to bed, Clara and I finished our wine outside in the cool night air. We dreamed aloud about the possibility of becoming famous authors, like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. Even though I knew it was just a dream, it was a comforting one. It was past midnight when I decided it was time to head home. Clara walked me to my car and gave me a deep kiss that reignited a spark of vitality within me. I left feeling invigorated, reminded that I still had a lot of life ahead of me. That I hadn't felt this alive since Natalie passed away, and though it was bittersweet, the thrill of driving home each day lifted my spirits. Over the next 3 months, I worked closely with an editor from Prentice Press to polish my manuscript. We collaborated through one face-to-face meeting, countless emails, and phone calls. The first task was to transition my draft from MS Word to a more sophisticated editing software. Once the manuscript was finalized, I received a printed galley overnight. I spent an entire weekend meticulously fine-tuning every detail, always finding minor improvements, just as my editor had predicted. That I continued working my day job at Folks Industries but devoted my nights to perfecting the novel. Laura, ever supportive, took care of me like a devoted caretaker, ensuring I stayed healthy and focused. Clara visited on weekends, helping to keep my creative energy alive. My book was set to release on May 1st, and my contract included a series of book signings across the country, including a stop in my hometown of Ellicott City, Maryland. The tour was both glamorous and exhausting, 28 days of traveling by plane or train, brief hotel stays, and back-to-back signings where I engaged with fans about my book's impact. Despite the thrill of meeting people, the constant travel took its toll. Clara surprised me by attending 2 of the signings, adding a touch of joy and familiarity to the tour. She played the role of a shy fan, while I took on the persona of the charming author. The final stop was back home in Ellicott City, which I had requested as the tour's grand finale. The bookstore was just a few miles from where I grew up. When I arrived, a crowd had already gathered, including familiar faces like my old boss and his wife. Seeing them, I embraced them warmly, catching up and exchanging contact details. Their presence brought me so much joy that I nearly forgot about the long line forming behind them. After signing their books and chatting briefly, I greeted everyone else with a smile and posed for some photos. The event turned out to be more enjoyable than I had anticipated. About 30 minutes in, an old friend who had been distant after Natalie's funeral approached with my book. I signed it for him, and he apologized quietly, explaining that he hadn't understood until he read my book. This scene played out repeatedly throughout the day with other old friends, each of whom apologized for past grievances. I felt a mix of gratitude and awkwardness with each encounter. The most intense moment came when Isabel Smith approached, looking visibly uncomfortable. She apologized for our past conflicts and revealed that she had divorced David, who had been the source of much pain for me. She was now engaged to someone else. Isabel also confessed to spreading a rumor that I was seeking revenge, which had led David to move abroad. Unsure of how to respond at first, I eventually signed her book with a message of peace and acknowledgement of her actions. We shared a brief, heartfelt hug before she left. Even after the event officially wrapped up, people continued to stand in line. I spotted Emily among the bookshelves, quietly observing. She didn't approach, and by the time I finished with the last book, she was gone. The final person in line was Laura. We shared a warm hug and chatted as she drove me back to my hotel, which wasn't the Holiday Inn but a charming place she had found for me. During the drive, we talked about Clara. Laura mentioned that she liked Clara and hoped I felt the same. When I admitted that I was in love with Clara, Laura began to cry on my shoulder. Just then, a police car pulled up with flashing lights. Sergeant Adams stepped out and came over to greet me. We caught up like old friends. I hadn't seen him in a while. I gave him a copy of my book with a note expressing how much knowing him had impacted my life. Adam had to leave for a call, so Laura and I headed in for dinner. The return trip home turned out to be less stressful than I had anticipated. The next surprise came when Emily showed up at my door. Clara and I had just been discussing the success of my book, which had climbed to third on the New York Times bestseller list, when the doorbell rang. Seeing my daughter standing there made everything else fade away. "Hi, Dad. How have you been?" Emily asked, sounding a bit embarrassed. "Hello, Emily. I'm fine. What brings you here?" I replied. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing," she said. "This neighborhood is 900 miles from yours, Emily." "That's quite a detour, isn't it?" I remarked, surprised that I felt Clara's hand on my shoulder and turned to see her standing beside me. "Care to introduce me, Tom?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of authority. "Clara, this is my daughter Emily," I said. Clara stepped forward and gave Emily a warm hug. "Come on in. I've heard so much about you," she said. The two women immediately started chatting animatedly as they moved into the living room, leaving me to tidy up the kitchen and attend to other tasks. I passed by the living room a few times while cleaning and saw them deep in conversation, laughing together. Clara admired Emily's children in the photos she showed her. "Honey, come join us out here," Clara eventually called, her tone leaving no room for argument. I went to sit next to her. She held my hand, more to keep me there than out of affection. Emily glanced down at our intertwined fingers, and there was an awkward silence that seemed to stretch on. "All right, since you two aren't going to say anything, I will," Clara said firmly. "Tom, I invited Emily here because she has something to say to you. I knew you wouldn't invite her, so I did. I understand this is your home, but if you want me to continue being a guest, you'll sit right here and listen to her." My eyes darted between Emily and Clara. Surrounded and not wanting to stir up another conflict, I settled back and braced myself. "Dad," Emily began, her voice trembling slightly, "I came here genuinely concerned about how you're doing. That part wasn't a lie. I also came to offer you an apology. I've been wrong about a lot of things, especially about you. I used to believe that everything that happened to Mom, Jack, and me was entirely your fault. I only saw part of the whole picture back then. It wasn't until I read your book that I understood things from your perspective." I felt so foolish as I listened to Emily. Reading her words and realizing the extent of the pain I'd endured was eye-opening. I hadn't recognized how much I still saw myself as her innocent little girl, despite being a grown woman with a family of my own. I always viewed Mom as a saint, even after the terrible things she did to me. To me, you always seemed strong, as if nothing could shake you. But now I understand that was just a shield to protect your feelings. Mom broke through that shield and hurt you in ways I never fully grasped. I thought if you could just be strong with her, forgive her, and come back home, everything would be fine. What I didn't realize was that your strength lay in your ability to walk away from someone you loved for over 25 years, to shield us all from her mistakes. Emily's tears hit me like a tidal wave of guilt. Clara looked at me, her gaze steady, waiting for my response. I needed more time to process, so I decided to delay my answer. What about Jack? I asked. How does he feel about me? Did he know you were coming here? Emily shook her head, her voice heavy with frustration. Jack's not doing well. Mom's actions hurt him the most. After Lori caught him cheating and divorced him, he moved to California and got into a reckless lifestyle. He's been hopping from one girlfriend to another and even got into trouble with a married woman's husband. He had to leave town. Jack still thinks cheating is no big deal. He doesn't know I'm here, and frankly, I don't care what he thinks. Emily's outburst left me little time to decide my next move, so I chose to postpone once more. Emily, what are your plans now? Are you staying in town? Do you have a place to stay? I'm staying with Laura, Emily said. She wanted me to see her new condo, so I'll be there for a couple of days before heading home. Here's what I'll do. I'll think over everything you've said today and let you know my decision. That's the best I can offer right now, honestly. I didn't expect even that much, Emily replied, her voice softening. Thank you. I'll head over to Laura's now. Clara, it was nice to finally meet you. I hope we can see each other again soon. Take good care of my dad for me. With that, Emily left as suddenly as she had arrived. I had a lot to consider, but this time, I had Clara by my side to help me avoid making any rash decisions. After our Caribbean cruise, a reward from Prentice Press for Fair Weather Friends topping the New York Times bestseller list, Clara and I flew to Maryland. This trip was special because it gave me the chance to meet my two grandchildren, ages 2 and 4, and introduce Clara to my hometown. Clara, already a grandparent, was a great help in navigating some challenging moments during the visit. The highlight of the trip came during a family dinner with Emily when I announced our engagement. This decision had been made during the cruise, and Laura was already planning the wedding. She would soon visit Clara's children to share our news, reflecting on our past. Clara and I cherish how life has unfolded. From youthful dreams to a reality filled with love and second chances, I look forward to starting another wonderful chapter with Clara. Who knows? It might even inspire another book.